live? I think so. Well, hi everybody.
Hi. It's not a fan podium.
Good, we have a responsive audience. This is a good thing. Brilliant. Hey, welcome everybody. I remember what it was like when I first became a graduate student. I was 22, fresh out of a bachelor's program, and here I was dumped into a first year of a PhD program. And it was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying. I was used to being the biggest fish in the lake I lived in, and suddenly there were a lot of bigger fish around. And it took me quite a while, I think, to come to grips with the fact that I was preparing for a career about which I knew very little. So today, I would like to reassure you that even though you might be doing training in how newts can walk up walls with pi bond interactions on the little hairs in their feet, well, that too is useful to you in the future. So today we're going to talk about how what we're doing is useful, and hopefully we can dispel a little bit of imposter syndrome. Has everyone heard of imposter syndrome?
Yes.
Some yeses, some nos. I think the diagram up, the cartoon from Red Pen, Black Pen up here can give you some indication of what that's about. Imposter syndrome is the suggestion that some people feel that they're sneaking around as grad students, and as soon as people figure out that they're not actually useful for anything, they'll be gone. That can be a very jarring feeling, but the reality is that all of us are figuring out the lay of the land as we go. You, if you feel like, I'm not sure I'm really at home in the research world, are not alone. And I want to convince you today that this work you're doing is going to be valuable to you whether or not you ever do research again. Okay, so with that, let us move ahead into stronger research skills for a stronger South Africa. We're going to spend a little time thinking about critical thinking. Critical thinking skills are often taken a bit for granted. We don't really talk about what those skills represent, so I'm going to take a deep dive on three ways to think about it. How we fill our brains, how we process information, and how we report that information. From there, we're going to start talking about research in industry. How is it that the research skills you're picking up now will be useful if you decide to forsake academia and go work in a real job? I'm married to a high school teacher. She has a real job. She works real hours. I do nothing on par with what she can accomplish. Next, research skills as a civic necessity. This might be an unpopular part of the talk, but in fact, the government of South Africa needs you to develop your research skills too. So let us proceed. I thought I would start with a little introduction to who I am. I'm Dave Tabb. I'm officially middle-aged. I turned 45 this month, and that was a hard reckoning, especially considering the fact that I injured my legs when I was in Ghana, and it's taking a long time to heal. So if you see me hopping around, that's probably what's going on. I'm an American, as you probably picked up from my accent. I'm from Missouri, which is in the middle of the country. And if you're curious about where Missouri is, I'll just say that if you were to take the contiguous United States and try to balance them on a pin, they would balance in Kansas, just west of where I grew up. Okay, I relocated. I decided to leave my job at Vanderbilt and move to South Africa to become a professor at Stellenbosch University. And I have to tell you, people in Missouri and people in Tennessee have never heard of Stellenbosch. They've probably never drunk a bottle of wine from Stellenbosch. This is a crime. All right. I am experienced. In the last year, I passed over 100 papers, and I didn't expect to be moved by that, but I really felt kind of shocked to realize I've had 100 publications. A lot of that just comes from middle author stuff, but I'm really proud of the fact that a few of these papers actually came from my keyboard, so that makes me happy. If you were in the field of proteomics, you might have heard of me. If you're not in the field of proteomics, I wouldn't be surprised if you hadn't. So that's okay, and being famous is one of those things that happens in very small pots. Okay, and I'm also very noisy. I'm one of the noisier professors out there on social media. One of the things that I try to do is to record all of these lectures. In fact, we're recording today, and that lecture will end up on my YouTube channel. If you have my name, you can find my channel. I'm also on Twitter. Mostly, if you follow me on Twitter, what you're going to learn about is what I dreamed each night. So, caveat emptor. All right. But I would say that surely there must be a better messenger to talk to you about the value of your research skills. First off, my industry experience is really, really limited. When I was an undergrad at University of Arkansas, someone convinced me that being part of the co-op program would be really good, a cooperative education program. So I spent 6 months of my undergraduate years in Chicago working for a pharmaceutical company, and they had just been bought out by Monsanto, so it was kind of an energizing time at the company. I spent a lot of time upgrading computers because I enjoy that sort of thing. So that's 6 months of my life. I haven't spent a lot of time in industry. There are people who can tell you a lot more about the industry experience of research. My government experience is even more tangential. I worked at a national laboratory at Oak Ridge National Lab when I was a postdoc, and so my experience of what the government pursues in research is a little different as well. I'm happy to talk about those experiences and what was positive and what was negative about it as well. But I would also note that even though I get to come here because, oh look, there's an American who teaches bioinformatics in South Africa, it's worth noting that South Africa does not need yet another American parachuting in to tell you what to do, right? So I would show you some of my colleagues instead. The second person in that photo is Gerhard Walzel, the man who convinced me moving to South Africa would really be a good thing, and a whole bunch of my colleagues there. But it's a really great group working in tuberculosis over at Stellenbosch University. So I don't want to leave you with anything but an expression of admiration for what they do. This is the problem that I want to spend this entire talk focusing on. You are probably not going to hear someone saying this today, but frequently when grad students talk among themselves, you see, I remember when I was a grad student, say to themselves, what am I doing here? I'm not learning anything useful in graduate school. Does anyone want to own up to having thought this quietly, maybe in your bed lying at night? A few people. So you're my audience today. I want to convince you that you are not wasting your time. You are in fact doing something very good for yourself, and something that commercial vendors would be very happy to bring on board, and something that your country needs you to be doing. So, I'm not learning anything useful in graduate school. I'm going to try to convince you that you are. Let's start with pub trivia. Now, back when I was in high school, I loved Quiz Bowl. Quiz Bowl was delightful to me. You'd get a team of 4 students together, and you'd have these 2 teams get asked lots and lots of toss-up questions. The first team that could buzz in and answer that question would win, right? They'd get points, and they'd get a bonus question. If they could answer that, they got even more points. Loved it. Loved it. And occasionally, I can be found at a pub in Durbanville taking part in pub quiz games. Still love it. However, grad school is lousy for pub quiz. When they ask you science and nature questions in pub quiz, are they asking you about pi bond interactions? They are not. They're more likely to ask you something about whales. And why would you know anything about whales? You work in newts. Okay, so learning research skills is not going to help your pub quiz game. So if you came for that, I'm sorry. It's not going to happen. I have 2 people that I wanted to quote on this subject. Albert Einstein is just very quotable, but he was right on point with this one. The value of a liberal arts college education is that it trains the mind to think. To think. By being in grad school, throwing your brain against intractable problems, you are learning to think. That is powerful. Does everyone know Mr. Geisel here? Dr. Seuss, down at the bottom, wrote a lot of children's books, very popular. He wrote, "It is better to know how to learn than to know." You know that you can learn many, many facts through Google. I think everyone has used Let Me Google that for you. But it is better to know how to learn than to know. So these are both valuable insights on what grad school is good about. One of the things that I always tell my PhD students is that I am training them to go out into the wilderness and come back with fire. That is a big, big challenge. And it represents a lot of what's so challenging about learning to be a PhD level researcher. So let's talk about that. Start with an ambiguous claim and a vague idea of how to proceed. Many of you are here on grant funding. Is that correct? Maybe a few of you on NIH funding, some on Medical Research Council, some on National Research Foundation. So grant funding is what enables us to do a lot of what we do. That grant funding, however, did not just materialize one day. Somebody had to write a proposal for that. And that proposal was deemed to be strong enough that these funding agencies decided to throw some money at it. That money, in turn, pays your bursary. Great. So, that ambiguous claim and a vague idea of how to proceed is how I'm referring to your PI's grant text. Now, am I being disrespectful here? I don't think so. Because when we write grants, we don't know as much as when we're pursuing the research in them. So frequently what we write in these grant texts is in fact not possible, and it won't work. So we try what we wrote in the proposal and realize it doesn't work correctly. It doesn't work the way that we expected it to. We didn't get the result we expected. Therefore we can't really proceed following those instructions. So now we realize that what we proposed is imperfect. The process is not then to throw it out, but to perfect it. So discover the pitfalls and the hidden logic errors that were found in that initial plan. You know, in the military, they sometimes say that no battle plan survives contact with the enemy, and in the same way, no grant proposal survives contact with experimentation. So we discover what we got wrong as we wrote these grants. Next up, we want to fail forward. Fail forward. That's kind of an odd term, isn't it? Fail forward. We want to try the quality of these claims in a way that lets us decide, does this or does this not conform with reality? And maybe even improve the methods that we would use to test those ideas. So failing forward means that we're going to figure out where the holes in our logic were as early as possible, replace those ideas with something that's better, and move forward. In the end, and this is a very important and very overlooked part of research, we must find good ways to report the knowledge that we lacked when we started that task. Okay, so go into the wilderness, come back with fire. That's what I can expect of somebody who has a PhD. That's a tough challenge, but it means that when I hire somebody who already has a PhD, I expect that given very flawed instructions and very flawed ideas about what results they're going to get, they're going to come back with something better than what I gave them to start with. It's a stiff challenge. All right, so let's talk about critical thinking. Critical thinking has any number of definitions that have been put forward for it. So I'm going to focus on an input, process, and output model. Here I've just made a little word cloud. Did you know that you can generate these diagrams on your own? Wordclouds.com, you just go there, give it a PDF of some document, and out pops a graphic. It's very easy to do. In the old days, that was tough. Now it's trivial. So just thought you could do that here. So let's start with the first thing that critical thinking can do for you. Number one, research teaches you to fill your brain effectively. Okay, so here we have our funnel, we have this stuff out in the wild, and some of it is filtering into the brain. Look down below. So retrieve. Know where to go for needed details. If you encounter a term you don't know in the literature, is Wikipedia your first stop? Okay, it is for me sometimes. If you're writing a lecture, Wikipedia is your first stop. But, generally speaking, you know some higher credibility places that you could go to find out what those terms mean. It could mean that you go bother the postdoc, because the PI is absent, right? I mean, we're just not there. Right, so you could go ask the postdoc, and the postdoc in turn gives you some information. That's good. It could be that you use Google Scholar, or it could mean that you go on a keyword search in your favorite journal. These all represent improvements in our ability to retrieve information, to know where to go for needed details. This next one I think is quite overlooked. That is focus. There's a pile of information out there that you could read on any conceivable topic. How do you figure which parts of those are useful to you and which parts are completely extraneous? As a graduate student, you are getting better at learning where to put your focus in information retrieval. That's pretty powerful. Third, decipher. Parse numbers into meaning. You may say to yourself, numbers terrify me. What is he talking about numbers? He's going to stop talking about numbers now, right? I'm not going to stop talking about numbers. I'm a bioinformatics guy. So, numbers. I submit that you already know some things about numbers that other people do not. If you encounter the number 10E8 and the number 10E7, a layman might say, well, those look very similar. I bet those numbers are quite similar. But you, as a researcher, probably know that one of those is 10 times the other. That already is setting apart your ability to deal with numerical data beyond what we find in the wild. We need that kind of capacity. If I tell you that the log ratio between things is 0, a fair number of people in this room know that I'm talking about a 1-to-1 mix. Okay? We are learning better every day how to deal with numeric data because people are throwing it at us nonstop. Interpret, comprehend graphical representations. We have all kinds of ways that we show numbers. We can move well beyond bar charts and pie charts, right? Most of us could probably interpret a box plot. Some of us in this room probably feel comfortable with receiver-operator characteristic curves. Not everyone, not everyone. I'm in the biomarker field, so we have to ingest that stuff. But every day, you're getting exposed to new ways to represent numerical data in graphical form to make their meaning more, much clearer. All right? Infer. Oh, this is a tough one. We get to become better detectives. You know that sometimes when people get a paper published, they've played a bit of a fast one on us. And that some of the experiments that didn't work out as well did not make it into the paper. So we get better at inference, at recognizing that something belonged in this space and yet wasn't in the paper. We get better at inference. And finally, assimilating. Can you contextualize new data against the information you've already got? You know, when you read a paper, it doesn't just stand all by itself on an island in the middle of your brain. It's connecting to all these other papers you've read. That process of assimilation is a critical thinking skill that is sorely needed. Sorely needed. Okay, so that's just getting stuff into your brain. Let's move ahead. Research teaches you to consider data effectively. I'm not going to spend the time talking about calculus here. Calculus bothers a lot of people, I get that, but there are lots of critical thinking skills that you are developing every day to consider data better. Collation, integrating parts to produce a whole. Being able to integrate these different data sets in one model. Do you see that there are 5 papers out there that help, that all fit together to reaffirm some principle? Well, that's going to mean that you have to integrate that information together to create a logical whole from it. Contrast. Well, of course, if you've got a control and you've got an experimental, you're going to need to tell what changed between those two. So being able to form these contrasts is something that we're learning how to do. Reflect. Determine whether your data matched your expectations. I know it's kind of an emperor has no clothes moment, but I think we all remember that occasionally we should form hypotheses. We have a hypothesis, and we test the hypothesis through doing an experiment. Does everyone remember their philosophy of science classes? We don't just do systems biology and go on a massive fishing expedition to see what happens, right? Generally, we have a hypothesis about what should happen. If this idea is correct, we test it with a hypothesis. So we get the ability to reflect upon our expectations to see if the data that came out match our expectations. Extrapolation. What happens if we drive the biology in the other direction? What happens if we're using a different set of inputs than what have been seen before for a particular biological system? So being able to imagine how new interventions could change the response of that system is very necessary when you're trying to put together a new research plan to say, how can we push things a bit to learn more about this system? Synthesize. Can you form a gestalt? Gestalt is a great word. Everyone know gestalt? Gestalt. Not everyone knows the word. All right, we have a German in the room.
Yes.
Help me with my pronunciation of gestalt, if you will, sir.
That is very difficult. That's a figure, I would say.
Could you pronounce it properly for me?
Gestalt.
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 Okay.
You are a gestalt. So when I look at you, you are a gestalt. Interesting gestalt. Interesting figure, actually.
Okay. Are you able to synthesize a more complete picture of a thing? Are you able to stand back from that biological system and understand it at a 10,000-foot view? We speak of this as forming a gestalt. It's a very powerful skill and one that helps us to induct theory from experiment. Plan. Can you decide upon a course of action? All right, so all of that, we've now got information into our brains. We've now considered that information, which means it's time for some output. Research teaches you to report findings effectively. I've got another one of these terms. This time, am I going to German? Tabula rasa? Tabula rasa? Anyone got this? How's your Latin? Anyone have Latin? Ah, we have some Latin. All right. Let's call this the blank page. The blank page. In this case, it's the cleared table, I think is probably a more direct translation. So we're working from Latin. We have a blank page. In a blank page, if you're asked, how are you going to accomplish a thing? As a researcher, you gain the ability to figure out what broad strokes you must draw on this page to get you from not knowing this information to knowing this information. Planning. Being able to evoke this idea of, I bet I could try doing this and that would be the result. Facing a tabula rasa terrifies a lot of people. So being able to form a concrete plan out of nothing, that's a research skill. It's a very important critical thinking skill. Verbalize. Are you able to put into plain language so people can understand you? You know, when we write grants in the United States, we're always expected to write a section that says, in layman's terms, terms that people like Congress critters could understand, what is this research going to accomplish? We have to be able to write that. That's speaking at a very different language than what you're going to do if you're writing for Nature Biotechnology, right? So being able to verbalize for the right audience is a critical thinking skill you need. Visualize. Are you able to turn tables of numbers into something that people can grasp quickly? Very important. Cite. I know we all love citation, but it really does matter. Are you able to correctly explain where this bit of information comes from? I've tried to do that with these little notes at the bottom where I'm getting my clip art. I use a lot of clip art from openclipart.com, for example. It's appropriate to cite where this stuff comes from rather than just throw it up on my slides. Commit is very much a psychological concept that I've tried to draw here. Can you complete the project? Can you stand behind it? Those are actually very different challenges. Your advisor and the postdocs and the other grad students are all struggling with this all the time. When do we say we have enough experiments done that it's time to write this bloody thing up? Tough challenge. And you might say, okay, that goose is cooked, and your advisor may be telling you, no, you must do another experiment. Sometimes that's coming from greater experience, right? So being able to say, this is enough, this is the core of a paper, and being able to stand behind it. How many people really enjoy standing behind a podium like that? Do we start out on our very first day of grad school feeling like, oh yeah, I could just wander up there and give a 30-minute talk with very little preparation on some arcane principle? No. And we make our grad students do that, and they complain about it, but they get better. They get better at it. They feel less terror about it, and someday they become gifted public speakers. So this commit step is actually a really tough one. It takes a lot of effort. Finally, propose. Make the case for your next steps. So I've really gone into a lot of detail on just 3 slides here. But I want you to realize what you are doing is developing critical thinking skills that are valuable to you whether you stay in science or not. Is that research thinking going to be useful to you if you go into business? We have a few vendors here. Any vendors represented today? Okay, this room doesn't have them. They're out there. I'd love to ask them, would you feel more comfortable or less comfortable hiring somebody with a master's degree or just a straight BSc for some task? And generally speaking, that master's degree is going to be valuable because people have been learning these skills. What value does it have? Using a structured thinking process that's what we've been talking about for 3 slides now, will actually save employees time in the long run because they avoid making mistakes, such as jumping to the wrong conclusion or making a decision that others reject down the road. That's a high call, right? And it matters because businesses need to have people who are responsive to data deciding what comes next for that company. Research will alter your decision making. Now, I recently got married, and I have to say that my dating life has finally reached this nice culmination. I found somebody who's right for me, who's so much better than me in a lot of ways. But I have to tell you, in grad school, I dated a lot, and I was a friggin' mess. A mess. Has anyone been a mess in their dating lives in grad school? A few people? A few people? Okay. I'm so sorry. It does get better. It also gets worse, but it's okay. Sometimes it actually just gets better. All right, so down here at the bottom right, you probably have something that looks familiar to you. We have a heart mugging a brain. I'm so sorry. It does happen. But we are exercising our skills in finding ways that our brains can influence the decisions we make. So we see that we're emotional creatures by default. We're trained to think with emotions instead of using statistics, logic, reason, etc. Society fosters emotion-based thinking and decision-making. Okay, we're not Vulcans. We're not. We have some Star Trek fans in the audience. Okay, a few Star Trekkers. Okay, we're not Vulcans. We're not Vulcans. But we are occasionally allowed to power ourselves with our emotions in putting our brains into high gear. Critical thinkers are open-minded, confident, decisive, not reliant on others' approval, and able to see past their emotions when making choices. When I was a grad student, I had a really, really bad conflict with somebody, let us say, in power over me. I'm not going to get into who. But I have to say that this person thought everything I did was wrong. Everything. And was so dismayed that I was there working at this laboratory. It was a very frustrating experience for him, and a very, very stressful experience for me. But something I had learned in my 7 years as a PhD student, don't take 7 years to do it, guys. If you spend 7 years learning how to do PhD research right, you may find that you're not reliant on others' approval in deciding how to spend your time. That is a hard lesson, and frequently a very difficult one to put into practice. But you are learning to be... Will people be offended if I use a bit of naughty language? We're training you to be badasses. We are. We want you to be badasses. We're going to get you there. Is anyone in this room a fan of Monty Python? Did you expect to see the Spanish Inquisition? Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. You are learning how to be your very own inquisitor. You are learning how to interrogate yourself. When you hit the submit button on a manuscript, you have already been very, very critical of your own work and figured out what parts of this are vulnerable to attack by reviewer number 3. Reviewer number 3 is evil. And yet, you shall thwart him, or her. Could be a reviewer 3, could be a her. Researchers of all type can be supportive and not supportive. Okay, so how could these results be wrong? Are the results consistent with established theory? Are the results consistent with the available data? Have the best possible methods been used? What are the potential sources of error? Do assumptions affect the results? Are the results statistically significant? Did someone say p-value? All right, and is the preferred hypothesis the only and most plausible explanation? Think of all these tests our work have to pass in order to get published. That's tough stuff. All right. I would also point out that most people in graduate school are going to encounter numerical analysis. Some of them are going to go whole hog on it. They're going to do model fitting with lots of different factors, and they're going to be those geniuses you turn to, and they're going to go off to great careers. Some of us will learn when we need to display greater trust or less trust in a mathematical model. All of us have some sort of exposure to this. But what does this have to do with the industrial world? Klaus Schwab is a pretty famous dude, founder of the World Economic Forum, been a major economist for years. One of the things he wrote in this highly influential book called The Fourth Industrial Revolution, actually the dean made reference to this just a moment ago. Labor markets, meanwhile, are becoming biased towards a limited range of technical skill sets. These are the skills you're picking up right now. And globally connected digital platforms and marketplaces are granting outsized rewards to a small number of stars. That means that if you find that at some point using a random forest classifier in your data set is appropriate, you will suddenly have gained the ability to write on your CV, I know something about machine learning. And most HR departments will draw a big red circle around that and say, acquire. The skill sets you are learning on how to handle the data sets you're generating are highly relevant in the industrial climate. Here's a quote from the president of MIT. He reported many business leaders are saying, I have to lay off hundreds of people because, lay off is American for retrench. I had to learn that when I came here. When people were talking about retrenchment, I was like, why are people dealing with shovels? All right. I have to retrench hundreds of people because their jobs have disappeared and I do not need their skills. I have hundreds of job openings I can't fill because I can't find people with the right training and skills. You are developing these skills now. So you are learning something that's certainly relevant to having a job. What are the, this post is now 2 years old, I apologize for that, but what are the top 10 in-demand skills in South Africa? Number 1, statistical analysis and data mining. We do this all the time. Your skills, although you might not think of them as relevant to anything outside of newts climbing walls, are in fact very, very marketable. Java development. Is anyone learning some programming in grad school? Good, good. A few people. Maybe you're learning a bit of R. R is programming, everyone. Some people are learning how to do markup languages like HTML or XML formats. Those are skills that are all relevant in Java development, for example. Network and information security. We had a lab server get hacked by somebody who wanted to use it as a place to store illicit materials when I was in grad school. We learned something about network security. You can see there are lots of skills that are applicable to your research that are actually quite marketable in the workplace. But let's turn the page. What if you never do research again? Maybe you will say to yourself, I have invested 2 years in this master's degree thing. Academia is a weird place. I am leaving you losers behind. You could say that. And frankly, some of us are kind of weird, right? So if you decide that after 2 years of a master's experience, you've had enough, you do not go away empty-handed. That MSc may not be in a business topic, but that is not to say that no one cares whether you got that master's degree or not. You are not obligated to be a researcher just because you finish your MSc, and you are not obligated to be a researcher if you get a PhD. It may be that you decide that managing in the industrial climate would be a fun thing to do. You may find that the skills you've developed as a researcher make you an unusually clear-minded person who can figure out what needs doing. That's the manager. So that's not a bad outcome. It might be that you serve on an advisory board. You know, occasionally the parliament needs to make decisions about things and they want experts' opinions about it. If you have a master's degree or a PhD degree, you're more likely to be positioned for something like that. But what if you used your master's or PhD to run for elective office? Do you know you can do that? You're allowed. Down at the bottom, I've written, I realize it's getting a little covered by the podium. Might our next president have a master's degree or a PhD? Okay, those aren't struggle credentials, I get that. But if you have a master's degree or a PhD, people may find that they trust you a bit more. Pravan Gordhan has turned his training in pharmaceutical sciences, is that right? Into a pretty amazing run at finance. So clearly, our civic servants benefit from higher education. You may become one of them. Critical thinking is in fact central to citizenship. I'm just going to read this long quote, I hope you don't mind. Many good-hearted people cannot see through and critique propaganda and mass manipulation. And most good-hearted people fall prey at times to the powerful tendency to engage in self-deception, especially when their own egocentric interests and desires are at stake. One can be good-hearted and intellectually egocentric at the same time. I think about this every time I read my Facebook feed. I see a lot of people supporting President Trump, for example, in the United States, and I don't know if it's going to be a big surprise, but I don't like him, right? But I know that my friends who support him are doing so for reasons that feel right to them. They're not supporting him because they're evil people. So we find then that we need critical thinking to help us to look outside the boxes that we live within and think about the positions other people take. Is there merit in what this person is saying? So, very important critical skill for citizenship. And of course, research teaches you to resist fake news. I'm going to give you some examples. Many groups want to spin the public. We've used the term spin here. They're telling the happiest version of a tale of why somebody committed an awful crime, for example. All right, and manipulate their emotions to deceive them. The Russian government interfered in American elections. That is not in doubt. They did so by dividing one group from another within America using Facebook posts and other things. They did this. Manufacturers of miracle cures try to sell products. Now, I think one of the most common ones that we see show up, especially, say, when you take the train, because you'll see these signs everywhere. I put one down at the bottom. Lost love, specialist, same-day results. I can get fixed, I see, so this is great, right? So there's somebody who's ready to sell me a miracle cure. Because, though, I've been a critical thinker, I might ask, now, on what evidence am I to believe that that person can bring my lost love back to me? All right? Dubious journalists will try to clickbait you into interest. They're trying to make you click that article. If you see that at the very bottom here, I've written, "You won't believe number 7." As a critical thinker, you get better and better at resisting this kind of nonsense. A trained researcher learns the skills to resist such ploys. What I want you to say is that as a grad student, put away this thought that you're learning nothing of value. You are learning something of value. We are equipping you to become dangerous, to become somebody that other people must respect, to become someone that can lead others, can resist false information. We're teaching you to be self-educating, to realize where your gaps lie and how to fill those with more information, more training. We're teaching you to be flexible, able to deal with ambiguity and error. We're teaching you to be pioneering, ready for independent operation, for leadership. Those are life skills, and they apply whether you ever do research again or not. And I'm really proud to get to work with you. Thank you very much.